I want to thank the Dell family. It's a great family. He is amazing. She is amazing. They've done such a job on that. They put up a lot of money too. Put up $6.25 billion. That's somebody. And he started making computers on his bed in college and selling them because they were better than other computers. And I said, how did you do that? He said, well, I did it and I just never stopped. It just kept going. So go out and buy a Dell. They're great.
Meet computers on his bed. Go buy one. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. That should never be normal. But there's a reason Donald Trump strung together those nonsensical words and near sentences. Donald Trump telling people to, quote, go out and buy one, a Dell computer. It's because it's a company that he's personally invested in to the tune of at least $1 million. And while he's using his office, the office of the American presidency, to urge you to, quote, go out and buy one, this thing that he made on his bed, to buy from his preferred companies, the federal government, which he sits atop, is simultaneously handing companies like Dell massive government contracts. Yesterday, 19 days after Donald Trump urged cash-strapped and stressed-out Americans to buy his political patrons' computers, the federal government inked a nearly $10 billion with a B dollar contract with, wait for it, Dell. Of that, CNBC reports this, quote, the Department of Defense announced a 5-year, roughly $9.7 billion deal with Dell to provide a suite of software to the U.S. military. It comes after Michael Dell, the founder and CEO of Dell Technologies, pledged $6.25 billion, which Trump mentioned there, to fund investment accounts for children known as Trump accounts. A Navy spokesperson told reporters this, quote, the vendors were all evaluated based on competition, sure, an overall chain of value to the department. Going through the process of evaluation, they came out on top. They just happened to come out on top, I guess. The timing seems suspicious to you. Just wait, there's more. Forbes reports that back in February, Donald Trump purchased between $1 and $5 million in Dell stock. As of Tuesday, when Forbes compiled the numbers, that stock had gone up by 142%. With a median value gain of $4.3 million. They ranked it the #1 best stock trade that Donald Trump made. Now, that number is likely to get bigger, to rise. Dell stock has gone up more than 4% since the Pentagon announced a deal with Dell, which came after Trump told everyone to, quote, go out and buy a Dell computer, the one that he made, quote, on his bed. I'm sure it was in his paper that he made it out of his bedroom, but we'll save that for another day. Trump is the only president in modern history who's done this, who's traded like this. Every president since Gerald Ford has placed their assets in a blind trust to avoid even the appearance of corruption. Every president until Donald Trump. The Trump Organization says that outside brokerage firms make the trades with no involvement from Donald Trump, his family, or the organization. Okay, so it's a coincidence that he tells the country to go out and buy the computers? Okay. While Trump allies are being awarded contracts that benefit Donald Trump personally and financially, Americans, on the other hand, are facing more and more pressure from the Trump economy. Trump's war with Iran is jacking up yet another measure of inflation. On that, the New York Times reports this, quote, a measure of inflation closely watched by the Federal Reserve accelerated in April to a 3-year high. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Index rose 3.8% from the same time last year. It was the fastest annual pace since May of 2023, when the Fed was in the midst of raising rates to tame a burst of inflation that had emerged in the wake of the pandemic. A measure of underlying inflation that strips out volatile food and energy prices also notched a multi-year high. That measure, core inflation, increased at the annual pace of 3.3%, the fastest it has risen since November of 2023. Donald Trump continuing to brazenly and publicly enrich himself While the American people can barely afford groceries and gas, is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Norm Eisen is back with us. He served as special counsel for ethics and government reform in the White House under President Barack Obama and was co-counsel for the House Judiciary Committee during the first impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump. He's now a senior fellow at Brookings and the executive chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund. Also joining us, Brendan Ballou. He's the founder of the Public Integrity Project and a former special counsel in the Department of Justice. Also joining us, political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here. He's with me at the table for the whole hour. I start with you.
This is wild. The Dell story is the kind of story I was thinking about this when I was reading it yesterday. That it's kind of lame to do this at this point. But if you imagine any other politician, one of our former bosses or a Democrat, so Joe Biden or Barack Obama, having a corruption story at this level, it is the front page of the New York Times. It's leading the nightly news. People are talking about it for weeks. There are investigations. There are questions about it at the White House briefing. There are questions about it at the Hill. We're talking about it right now, but I feel like this Dell story is somewhat getting lost amidst a wash of all the other corruption, which is kind of the real story, that the scale of his corruption is so great, it's very hard to get your arms around. And that's not even so much a media criticism, it's just an analysis of just how outrageous and over the top that the corruption is. I mean, the Dell story, for Trump to have purchased this, my colleague Joe Perticone wrote about this at the Bulwark. The amount of stock trades he made in the first 3 months this year, the total amount of money, was more
3,700 trades.
Yeah, and the number was some number in the 8 figures. It was
that was so many trades. I don't trade, but it was so many that they looked automated. It looked like a computer had made them because it seemed like more than people that trade would make.
Or maybe they just have a team of guys in Mar-a-Lago who are just doing this in the Uday and Qusay drawing room. I don't know how they're doing it, but it was more money and more trades than all of Congress and the Senate. Right? There's this big conversation happening about how, we should have the Stock Trade Act, we should ban trades for Congress, and I don't care. That seems like the right thing to do. All this conversation about Nancy Pelosi, 12 months, 535 members, the entire year of 2025, they did less in total than Donald Trump did in the first 3 months of this year. So that's the scale of his investing. And then you have this example where you have millions being made on a company that he is at the White House promoting, and then that the government provides a multi-billion-dollar contract to. It's not even subtle. It's nothing that's subtle. There's another story out today from ProPublica. Some other company got a defense contract that Don Jr. is on the board of, and what ProPublica reported is they have 2 sources saying that the White House called, and we know this is happening, but it's good to have a source that's saying that this happened. The White House called the Department of War and said, hey, you got to do this contract, and it's for a company that Don Jr. is invested in. What they are doing is so far beyond. Think about all of the time spent on Pelosi and the Pelosi tracker, and this is not to endorse, I don't know exactly what was happening there, anything that she did with investments. The scale of this is so far beyond that it's really kind of challenging to contextualize it for people.
Well, Trump helps us, right, Norm? I mean, Trump standing in the Rose Garden saying Dell. And Trump, who multiple news outlets have reported, simply writes things on things that are printed out for him. So I'm not sure he's the best Consumer Reports evaluator of any computer, but whatever. Trump says this about Dell Computers. Quote, they, Dell, have done such a great job. He made computers on his bed. That's as close as Trump is going to come to a personal endorsement of a computer. It happens in the Rose Garden. They are acting, and I guess this is in their defense what the Republicans in Congress have ushered in. They're acting with impunity to literally smash and grab taxpayer dollars, shove them into their own coffers because the Republicans in Congress have allowed them to.
That's right, Nicole. When I was in the White House and we would have an issue, I would regularly get calls from Democratic senators who would say, look, I've got to speak out about this. The complete abdication where you don't have any meaningful legislative oversight. They've given up their power to deal with this. Is like nothing we've ever seen in the history of our country. It really harkens to other authoritarian regimes where you have this kind of naked run on the bank by the leaders. And it's not just that the American people hate corruption, and they do. They list it as a top issue in poll after poll. It's that this is a Trump tax that all of us are paying. When government is broken in this way, it directly drives up the costs for the American people. And I think you're going to see that this administration and its cronies and allies pay a very steep price for this. When at the Contrarian, we did our latest list of the top 10 Trump corruption scandals, the stock trades were only number 4. The challenge was, how do you pick just 10? And I do think they break through, whether it's financial corruption, like the Dell trade that we're talking about, or whether it is the corruption of the rule of law that we're seeing over and over again. The drumbeat of it is loud. People are noticing, and there'll be a stiff price to pay, including because we're feeling it in our pocketbooks.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. As Donald Trump flirts with a 30% approval rating, he is telling the American people to their faces, day in, day out, that he is done pretending to care about what they think. He doesn't care about the midterms. He does not care about your financial situation. All that stuff you promised in the campaign, that's just the stuff you have to say to get elected. Donald Trump cares about 3 things, I think: enriching himself and his family, using the power of the state to seek retribution on those who cross him, and putting his name and his face on as many things as possible. And honestly, no one should be surprised, because Donald Trump has been telling us all along just who he is and what he's about. I mean, almost literally. Do you remember the poem, The Snake? Trump would weirdly recite it at all the campaign rallies. It was supposedly about scary immigrants, but anyone even paying half attention could see that the guy was telling everyone who he was, and his supporters just ate it up.
Who has heard the poem called The Snake?
Has anybody ever heard The Snake? This is The Snake, and people love it, and I do it if people want to hear it. I read this the other day, and I said, wow, that's really amazing.
It's called The Snake.
Should we do The Snake or not? Get me the snake, please. The snake. Should I do it or not? Should I?
On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake,
A tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. Interesting. His pretty-colored skin had been all frosted with the dew. Oh, well, she cried, I'll take you in, like we're doing.
Take me in, O tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman, sighed the broken snake. She clutched him to her bosom. You're so beautiful, she cried. But if I hadn't brought you in by now, oh heavens, you would have died. She stroked his pretty skin again and kissed and held him tight. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite.
I saved you, cried the woman, and you've bitten me. But why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die.
Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin. You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
The snake doesn't just bite the woman. The snake says, shut up, you silly woman. The snake reveals in the moment that he is killing the woman, like, this was a con all along. I don't care. You knew damn well I was a snake when you let me in. And here we are. We're at that moment in the story. Because yes, we did. Donald Trump was a snake, and we did let him in twice. And now he is biting us over and over and over and basically calling us stupid. His second term has turned into an absolute feast of corruption and vindictive prosecution and self-aggrandizement. We watch as he awards himself a $1.8 billion slush fund for him and the January 6th insurrectionists and Lord knows whoever else. And the ballroom he's building, where the East Wing used to be, that he wants $1 billion of your dollars for. Or this renovation of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, where Trump's guy got a no-bid contract from the government because they had to rush quick and finish it before the 4th. We're learning about the president's stock trading, which is on a level that no one has ever seen from a politician anywhere, including Congress. 3,700 transactions in the first 3 months of this year. Oh, it's an outside firm that handles those trades, he says. So it must be sheer coincidence, for instance. His portfolio is filled with the same companies whose CEOs went to China with him, or with Dell Computer. Earlier this year, more than $1 million worth of stock was bought for the Trump org. Then Donald Trump went out and told everyone, literally, go buy a Dell. Then yesterday, the Pentagon announced a $9.7 billion contract with, wait for it, yes, you got it, Dell Computer. A $10 billion deal. And in after-hours trading tonight, their stock was up almost 40%. Now, Dell says they won the contract fair and square. You can decide whether you find that credible. Today, ProPublica published this report saying that Peter Navarro, Trump advisor, a guy who actually did prison time, a guy who helped plot January 6th, a guy who might get money from that fund, appealed directly to the Trump administration to loan a North Carolina startup company more than $600 million. Again, the size that we're talking about of the graft, of the corruption, is like incomprehensible. $600 million. That was 3 months after the venture capital firm of Donald Trump Jr. took a stake in that same company. What a coinky-dink. Well, Don Jr. and the Pentagon say those relationships had nothing to do with the deal. ProPublica reports that DOD staffers were tasked with working around the clock to get the loan, and as one DOD official, granted anonymity, told the outlet, and I quote, "The call came from the White House. We have to get this done." And all of this happens. And as all of this happens, the man and his bootlickers are busy plastering his name and his face on everything. Today we learned Trump is trying to print a $250 bill with his own face on it, like the U.S. passports with his face that are apparently coming this summer to those who are unfortunate enough to live in the D.C. area. He's mused about having himself carved in Mount Rushmore. He had the Palm Beach airport named after him, also with a generous licensing agreement that allows him to profit from all the merch they sell there. He's floating the idea of renaming Washington Dulles Airport after himself as well. He wants New York Penn Station to become Trump Station. His name is already on the Kennedy Center in D.C. The stenciled name that they put up there is the Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center. Only memorial for one, we would imagine. He did the same thing with the U.S. Institute of Peace. It's now the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace, and everywhere you look in D.C., his face is all over the banners. The Department of Labor, he got his own face blown up right next to Teddy Roosevelt. The USDA put him up next to a banner of Abraham Lincoln. Union Station, there are banners depicting Trump as a construction worker, thanking him for his recent renovation work. Most offensively, banners of the leader's face hang on the Department of Justice itself, an institution that he has corrupted beyond recognition and which now acts as an attack dog for the president, going after anyone who crosses him with the full force of the most powerful state on earth. Going after people like the former director of the FBI. Of course, last night we learned about the investigation into the case of E. Jean Carroll, the woman who very credibly accused Donald Trump of rape, a woman who sustained what she said in front of a civil jury. Donald Trump is intent on punishing those he deems to have crossed him. He's gorging on power and corruption. He's using our government as full extension of himself. And here's the thing. He's at the point where he's not just pretending to be some broken snake. He's not frozen. He's not trying to be anything else. No, this is the point in the story when he tells us all. And he bites us. And I gotta say, no one can say they are surprised by any of it.
Well, the tortured soul and lying mind of the most incompetent Treasury Secretary in history was on display once again today, this time in the White House. Scott Bessent began his comments in the White House press briefing room today by, of course, insulting Democrats in the House and Senate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good. I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here today. This is my warm-up for my Senate and House hearings next week, so I don't want anyone yelling, reclaim my time. And then he said something that would be a crime,
and I mean literally a crime, if he said it in testimony to the House or the Senate, because lying to Congress is against the law.
President Trump has done something that no other administration is able to do. We have gotten the Iranians to talk about their nuclear program and to perhaps commit to not having one. That has never happened before. It had been off the table.
That would be criminal perjury in a courtroom, and it would be the crime of lying to Congress if Scott Bessent dared to say that in a House or Senate hearing where every Democrat, and I mean every Democrat, would immediately read to the lying Treasury Secretary exactly what Iran agreed to in writing in 2015 in an agreement negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry on behalf of President Obama and joined by 5 other countries. And in that agreement, Iran put this statement in writing on page 3. Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek, develop, or acquire any nuclear weapons. Right there. Proof of the Treasury Secretary lying. Proof beyond any conceivable doubt. And Scott Bessent knows that the safest place to lie in Washington is the White House press briefing room, where not a single member of the White House press corps challenged him on that lie. Now, it is not clear how many members of the White House press corps have ever read Iran's written agreement to never develop nuclear weapons that Iran signed with the United States of America. Scott Bessent did something today that no other Treasury Secretary would have ever even considered doing. He played with counterfeit money publicly when he was asked about Donald Trump's latest perverse fantasy of seeing his face on a new $250 bill.
How long until we see your signature next to President Trump's face on a $250 bill?
Well, again, as Treasury Secretary, I have 2 mandates for U.S. currency. At present, no living person can be on U.S. currency, and the currency must say, "In God we trust." So right now there is proposed legislation in front of the House, in front of the Senate, to change the first requirement so that a living person, Donald J. Trump, could be on a $250 bill. So it's all in the hands of the, it's all up on Capitol Hill. So at Treasury, we prepare things in advance. So we have prepared in advance that if the legislation is passed, but we will stick to the law.
It's never going to happen. Congress has to vote to authorize a $250 piece of currency, and Congress would have to repeal a law that prevents the faces of living people from being on our currency, and then Congress would have to pass another law that put Donald Trump's face on that new piece of currency. And so we can say with confidence tonight that Donald Trump's face will never appear on a $250 bill, and in fact, Donald Trump's face will never appear on American currency ever, because the 60 votes necessary to do that in the United States Senate will never exist. And our self-clowning Treasury Secretary knows that, but he felt the need today to carry his public worship of Donald Trump to the point of now being locked in history as the buffoon who actually held up that obscene piece of counterfeit money today in the White House. But it worked. That moment distracted the White House press corps from asking more serious questions of that oh so eager, self-humiliating liar. He dismissed the question that he did get about the Trump slush fund to pay criminal Trump supporters who tried to kill Capitol police officers and tried to kill the vice president in their attack on the Capitol on January 6th. The money from the Trump slush fund comes from the Treasury and is authorized by the Treasury Secretary to be sent to the Justice Department Scott Bessent refused to say anything about that today, claiming that all questions about that should be directed to Donald Trump's acting attorney general, who was his criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche. No one even thought to ask Scott Bessent if he had already sent the money to the Justice Department. Scott Bessent previewed in his contempt for Congress at the beginning of his remarks that he expects his congressional testimony next week to be, shall we say, contentious. And we know who he will be fighting with, who he will be eager to fight with. He will be fighting with and insulting the Democrats on the committees. He will not be respectfully disagreeing on substance. In the Senate Finance Committee, there are 14 Republicans and 13 Democrats, and all 13 of the Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee voted for the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. And in that vote, they voted to respect Scott Bessent's marriage to a man with whom Scott Bessent has 2 children, a lifestyle that was made legal by Democrats in the state of New York, where Scott Bessent got married in 2011, when that same marriage would have been illegal in Scott Bessent's home state of South Carolina, where he lives now and is legally married thanks to Democrats. Every Republican president during Scott Bessent's adulthood has put Supreme Court justices on the court who oppose marriage equality. One Republican-appointed Supreme Court Justice, Anthony Kennedy, joined with 4 justices appointed by Democratic presidents to achieve a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court that made Scott Bessent's New York marriage legal in all 50 states in 2015. And 7 years after that, both of the Republican senators in the state where Scott Bessent now lives, in South Carolina, voted against Scott Bessent's marriage. And Scott Bessent will be testifying to one of those senators next week in the Senate Finance Committee, Tim Scott of South Carolina, who, along with Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who has never been married to anyone, were among the 37 Republicans in the Senate who voted against respecting Scott Bessent's marriage in 2022. When Scott Bessent appears before the Senate Finance Committee, where he plans now to spend his time insulting Democratic senators, he will be appearing before 12 Republican senators who voted against respecting his marriage, including the chairman of that committee. And he will be unfailingly respectful to those Republican senators who are on record as disrespecting him before they ever knew he existed. And Scott Bessent knows. Scott Bessent knows how all of them voted on his marriage. Scott Bessent knows he will be looking at 12 Republican men and women who, as senators, voted to disrespect his marriage, and he will be looking at 13 Democratic men and women who, as senators, voted to fully respect his marriage, and he will choose to personally attack those 13 Democratic senators. He will not respectfully disagree with them on substance, as he could, as previous Treasury secretaries would. He will attack them as we have never seen a Treasury Secretary attack senators before, because that is the mandate of Trump cabinet officials, that they attack Democrats when they testify to Congress. What is the truth in the tortured soul of Scott Bessent? How does he really feel when he looks up at the Senate Finance Committee and sees those people who he thinks are on his side now, who voted to disrespect his marriage and would vote to disrespect his marriage again, and those Democrats who voted to respect his marriage and would vote to respect his marriage again? How does he really feel? We will never know. And Politico is reporting today, in a twist that Donald Trump and his criminal defense lawyer and acting attorney general could not have foreseen, because they don't know tax law well enough, Donald Trump might have to pay taxes, income taxes, on the $1.776 billion of the so-called settlement. Quote, some tax practitioners say the way that the fund, which Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche announced May 18th is structured, likely makes it an income tax liability for the president, potentially costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Effectively, a range of federal income tax experts said Trump appears to be the beneficiary of the $1.8 billion, even if the money is eventually routed to others through the 5-person commission responsible for dispersing the fund. Our first guest tonight, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, who is also a constitutional law professor, released his top 10 reasons why Donald Trump's slush fund is unconstitutional.
Tomorrow, Pam Bondi will be facing serious questions when she meets with the House Oversight Committee behind closed doors about the Epstein investigation. A Democrat on the committee says it will be transcribed, but has called for her to testify under oath and on camera. My next guest has made the same plea to Republican Chairman James Comer. Joining us now, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. I'm wondering what the pros and cons are. We know what you would like to see happen. Why do you think that's important? And what's the argument you're getting from the chairman?
Well, the chairman hasn't actually addressed it. Let's be clear. There is no reason that we should not videotape the entire transcribed interview from the former attorney general. This is an incredibly important moment for the Epstein investigation. Pam Bondi has a lot to answer for. Why are only 50% of the files released? Why were the names of survivors, as we know, doxxed and really put in danger? Many of them were put in danger during this process. Why still has there been no real information about the president's name, which was put in and then removed, and the files were moved around? There's so many questions for the attorney general. And this idea that Republicans don't want to release the interview as an actual video to the public, which they, of course, have done on all these other interviews recently, is crazy. And it really leads to this idea of a massive, coordinated cover-up. We're looking forward to the interview, but it needs to be released to the public.
Well, while you're advocating for it to be on camera, we've seen Pam Bondi, let's say, contentious in live settings when the cameras are rolling. And I just want to remind folks, here are some exchanges from her last public congressional hearing.
Why?
I have asked.
Didn't she ask Merrick Garland this?
I am reclaiming my time, and when I
will
reclaim my time, it is
Mr. Chairman, the gentlelady has reclaimed her time.
I'm not going to get in the gutter for her theatrics.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer the
theatrics are
question the way I
ridiculous. Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed.
Red-handed? There was one redaction out of
he's
over
listed as a co-conspirator.
4,700, and we invited you in. This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get, you're a failed politician.
So I think it's fair to say not a lot was learned. Do you have any hope, any expectation that if there is a closed door setting, if the cameras aren't rolling, maybe she changes her approach, maybe it produces more answers?
Well, look, she needs to answer our questions. And at the end of the day, she's no longer the attorney general. And so this is an opportunity for her to be honest, to come clean, to give us the facts so that we can understand why there has been this consistent cover-up. Why did the president call this investigation a hoax? Why did she try to bury and stop this investigation? Why have there been no criminal convictions? And why is 50% of the files still not released to the public? So these are fair questions. These are questions that Democrats have, and there are some Republicans that have joined us to also push for these answers. We are once again demanding the Republican chairman of this committee to ensure that this is released in a videotape to the American public and the media. Why the cover-up? So we're going to ask the right questions. We're going to share as much as we know from this interview, that the attorney general has been at the center of this Epstein scandal and cover-up led by the White House.
So if Bondi ends up being evasive, if she stonewalls your questions, other lawmakers' questions tomorrow, is there anything you can do?
There is. I mean, one, look, this is not the only conversation that we can have with her. And I think certainly if we win the majority, I think the former attorney general can expect more questions from us. There are going to be other parts of this investigation that start coming together in the months ahead where we may want to speak to her again. And we are going to wait and see how the Republicans actually treat this interview tomorrow. Are they going to treat it as the serious exercise that it needs to be as part of this investigation? Or are they going to be there to try to continue to cover up and lie and ensure that we're diverting the actual facts and not getting justice for the survivors? Look, Pam Bondi never sat down and met with all the survivors. They begged her to do so. It is a shame that she refused to meet with the survivors. It's a shame that the current acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, has done everything to try to hide and essentially evade our questions. He's also not met with the survivors. So we have a lot of questions tomorrow, and the Attorney General needs to explain why there has been so much corruption at the Justice Department.
So you say she could be brought back. As I'm sure you now know, she's now facing an ethics complaint brought to the Florida bar by a coalition of legal groups, including a former Florida Supreme Court justice. They accuse her of coercing DOJ lawyers into unethical acts, pursuing cases without probable cause, and the mishandling of the release of the sensitive Epstein victims' records. Could that open up new lines of questioning for her?
Absolutely. Look, Pam Bondi is no longer the AG, but certainly she was at the center of an enormous amount of weaponization and corruption at the Department of Justice. I mean, the way that Donald Trump essentially made that department his own personal team of lawyers, the way that he went after and continues to go after his political enemies, the way that he has used the legal system to go after folks that he feels has wronged him or wronged his family and friends. And Pam Bondi has been completely complicit in all of that. She has supported everything the president has wanted. The weaponization of the Department of Justice has been unprecedented. The way they have not listened to survivors, not convicted, not gone after those that have been guilty of serious crimes is crazy. The way they've treated the January 6ers. I mean, they've essentially said that they are heroes in some ways. And now they want to give them, as you know, $1.8 billion. There's a possibility that some of them may get from this crazy illegal fund that Donald Trump has set up. So there's a lot that Pam Bondi needs to talk about, and we look forward to asking those questions and her answering them tomorrow.
Some of the questions that have been answered, the information that's gotten out there, has been driven, first of all, of course, by the survivors who have been unrelenting and have found allies in folks like you, members of Congress, but also the American people who looked at this and said, look, something's not right here. We want answers. But do you have a sense that with everything else that's going on, with war and the economy, that pressure is fading and it makes your job and what you want to do with this more difficult?
Look, the reality is when I'm out in the community, being back home in California, people are constantly asking me about the Epstein files. The American public understands that this is important. Absolutely. The American public consistently is asking us to close this investigation, to get justice for the survivors. They continue to push. It is constant. And I think what people understand is that this is just bigger than this investigation. We're talking about whether women and girls in this country, when they report the most horrific thing that could happen to them, whether it's rape or abuse or it's trafficking, is their government going to actually respond? Is the government going to actually do something to take on these powerful men and these men that are committing these horrific acts and crimes? And so we owe it to the women and girls in our families, in our schools, to our students, that this government can actually stand up and prosecute and take on these men that are committing these horrific acts. And it's these same men that are not just abusing women and girls, but then are stealing our taxpayer dollars with no consequence. It is time for this group, this powerful group of the Epstein class, to actually have accountability in this country.
Well, we look forward to hearing from you and others who are inside that room tomorrow if you get some of the answers you're looking for. Congressman Robert Garcia, thank you so much. It's good to see you again.
Americans' views of their own financial situations has hit an all-time low. That's according to a recently released survey by the University of Michigan, which measures monthly consumer sentiment. Some respondents said higher prices are hurting their personal finances. And many now believe that inflation will only grow in the long run. Let's bring in former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner with charts looking at this issue. So let's start with inflation, which, gosh, I can't imagine it higher. What are you seeing, Steve?
Yeah, look, Mika, it's pretty incredible that yesterday you had the Treasury Secretary saying it was the best economy ever.
Right.
Literally the day before, you had the University of Michigan releasing its latest consumer sentiment numbers, showing that it's hit an all-time low. And there are actually two measures of how the consumers feel about it, which are interesting to see because they tend to track. One is from the Conference Board, and it measures how consumers feel about the broader economy, jobs and things like that. And the other is Michigan, which measures how they feel about their own finances. And as I said, they used to track very closely, and now they've diverged widely. And you've got consumers basically at the 73-year all-time low in terms of how they feel about their own finances, and not feeling great about the economy, but feeling substantially different about the broader economy. So why is that? As you said, inflation is in the picture. And this measures actually not inflation, but how consumers think prices are going to behave over the coming year. How much are they going to go up? So how are they feeling looking forward? Back at the time of the election, it hit a recent low at 2.4%. People thought inflation was well under control. Then you had Liberation Day with the tariffs, and everybody explaining the tariffs are going to add to inflation. Expectations shot up here over 6%. Then they declined again, but now with the war, they're up to 4.8%. So inflation is running at the moment at 3.8%. Consumers think it's headed to 4.8%, and that adds to this incredible pessimism.
So I just curious, as you get to the next graph, wonder where the Treasury Secretary is getting his information, and then if you could talk about where profits are versus wages.
Yeah, so it is. People talk about something called the K-shaped recovery. It's a kind of funny way to think about it, but K meaning it goes up for some people and it goes down for some people, and that's what we're seeing. The overall economy is still growing, as I just said, but when you look at how it's affecting different groups of Americans, you get to very different answers. So here we again take the Michigan consumer sentiment numbers. You can see that 73-year all-time low. On the other hand, you've got stock valuations at essentially close to an all-time high. And so it has gone very well for owners of stocks and very badly for people, average Americans. Another way to think about it is corporate profits. Corporate profits were ticking along at a 13% growth rate. That's a lot, obviously, 13% year over year every quarter. But in the first quarter of this year, it shot up to 28%. That's part of why the stock market is doing so well, obviously. So the owners of the stocks are doing quite well. By the way, the top 1% of Americans own 50% of the stocks. The top 10% own 87% of the stocks. But for the average American, there's just been fairly modest wage increases, 3.8%, year over year relative to corporate profits going like this. So you've got owners of stocks and higher income people doing incredibly well, people at the bottom doing not so well. And also, last comment on this, inflation is now running ahead of wage increases, so people are actually losing ground in terms of how much they can buy.
And so, Steve, that disparity brings you to the next chart about how much wealthy people, homes with high net worths, are spending right now. And you kind of use the example of gas prices, which are difficult for many, many Americans, but not felt by wealthy Americans.
Yeah. So people, if you listen to corporate CEOs talking, they all say that people toward the bottom are cutting back, people toward the top are spending more, and that is supported by the numbers. The top 10% of households now account for more than 45% of total spending, which leaves the bottom 80% with less than 40%. And you can see this trend, which has been going on for a good while, the lines have crossed, and now the top 10% well above the bottom 80%. There was an interesting study recently, just to pick one example of a product people buy, if not every day, certainly every week, which is gasoline, and what's happened there. So this tracks how different income groups, higher income, middle income, lower income, buy their gasoline. And basically, again, it tracked pretty closely until you get here. And since the war, wealthy people have maintained their share of gasoline purchases. People in the middle have been cutting back sharply. People at the bottom have cut back even more sharply. And so, again, you can see this K-shaped economy where the wealthy can still buy gasoline and people of middle and lower incomes are being forced to cut back on something that, again, most people need every day to get to work or get to school or get to somewhere.
Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner, thank you very, very much for that.